us. Now, I am pleased to welcome our speakers today, Cornelius Tulloch and Luisa Múnera. Today's event is part of our online series, AIRIE Asks, in which we get to sit down with AIRIE Fellows as they reflect on their residency experience. So Cornelius was with us in January, and we're excited to talk to him today. Feel free to join us, Cornelius and Luisa. I'm going to give you a little bit of their bios before they start talking. Cornelius is a Miami-based interdisciplinary artist and designer with work transcending the barriers of photography, fine art, and architecture. Cornelius focuses on how creative mediums can be combined to tell powerful stories. Whether it be through photography or painting, cinematic moments and spatial complexity are depicted. Lighting and color become characters in his work, as you will see. And his unique storytelling through his work has been shown in venues, including the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., Pulse Art Fair in Miami, and the Maxi in Rome, Italy. Luisa is going to be in conversation with Cornelius. They've known each other for a little bit. They'll tell you a little bit more about that. Luisa Múnera is currently the Associate Curator and works alongside national curators at YoungArts. She works with winners in design, photography, and visual arts on the production of national and regional exhibitions. She has had the opportunity to curate various Presidential Scholars of the Arts exhibitions at the Kennedy Center, Total Tolerance, an exhibition at the US Department of Education, and virtual exhibitions during this pandemic. Luisa has a BFA in Interior Architecture from Pratt University and an MS in Design and Urban Ecologies from Parsons, the New School for Design. I'm so excited to have both of you with us today to talk. I'm going to exit and let you guys delve into Cornelius's residency experience. Thank you so much and enjoy, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jane, and AIRIE and Cornelius. I'm very excited to be spending an hour with you this evening and kind of delving into a little bit of what you explored during your residency. Just in case people don't know, I've known Cornelius since 2016 when he was a YoungArts double winner in design, design and visual arts. And I've had the opportunity to work with him and see the evolution of his work from 6 years ago to now. To be invited to participate in this conversation with him means the world to me, because working with emerging artists, young artists, being able to see a trajectory and really taking advantage of all of the opportunities and organizations and residencies that are at their disposal is incredible. And just, you know, not that you've come so far because you were already so great to begin with, but if you don't mind, Cornelius, why don't you just in a couple sentences tell us a little bit about yourself and your overall practice?
Yes, and it's so great that we're both in conversation. We just spoke about this earlier, of just like having the community of Miami who has seen the progression be a part of this whole journey has just been amazing. And for me, myself, as you said, like interdisciplinary from way back when, I always was in between design and art and, you know, navigating that space and realizing that for me, it wasn't about, you know, what medium or thing that I was working in, but the story behind it. And really being able to just tell these different stories and get into different dialogues through a creative medium and being able to share that with other people has just been amazing for me as an artist, and seeing also how people react to it and seeing where I was from 6 years ago till now, and seeing that, you know, from then I said, you know, I wanted to be interdisciplinary, I want to do this, and seeing that I've still been able to continue on that path and been supported by so many organizations and people has just been a really great experience to where I am now.
Do you think that from 6 years ago to now, the idea of the idea of an interdisciplinary artist has become like something that is more understandable by other, because I remember when I was younger, it was was like you have to fit a specific kind of space, and to be able to kind of exactly what you said, be able to hold a story as your grounding kind of force and just experience it and investigate it through these. Have you found that a lot more people are doing it or more receptible to it?
Yeah, I feel like now I definitely see more people doing it. As much of my, I guess I'd consider them my contemporaries, like friends who are making work, are working in so many different ways and like collaborating in interesting ways. I still think the industry as a whole is still grasping the concept of like interdisciplinary, but it definitely is making waves, and you will see, and now you can see so many artists are working in these different formats that, you know, they may have not seen. But I mean, even when you look back in art history, so there are artists who are doing architecture, art, different things, you know, when you think about those Renaissance men and different people that they were working in these ways. And I think that we're returning back to like this understanding where we're no longer putting ourselves or other creatives in a box and like allowing them to explore and work in different ways. And it's great to see organizing those, seeing like that. I've known you from then, and being embraced in these kind of multifaceted ways has been amazing.
Thank you for that insight. What enticed you about this residency program with AIRIE? Why did you feel like you needed to apply, and what was it that you were hoping to get out of it?
Yeah, honestly, it was a big question mark. Like, I didn't really know what to expect or like what was going to happen. But, you know, I saw the application come out, and then I saw the board and different things and saw who was on the jury and saw that it was like a really interesting and like also within their own right, like multidisciplinary individuals who were coming to the table to be a part of this. So I was like, you know, this is a great opportunity also for me to spend time in the Everglades. You know, I've lived in Miami most of the majority of my life and have barely been to the Everglades, probably like once or twice prior to this. So I was like, you know, a month to really be in this space and then actually looking into the history and stories of things that happened there. From there, it was like opening Pandora's box, and I'm glad that I did.
So I know that you were interested in investigating the Florida Highwaymen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was that something that you encountered while you were in your residency, or had you done prior research and it just like felt like such a great fit, or just curious?
Yeah, so it came about beforehand. Maybe in about like, say earlier that year when the applications were coming out, I found out about them and I was like, you know, how have I lived in Florida, coming from there, and never heard of the story of these 26 painters who, you know, made their own way by selling paintings along the highway, and like, you know, all these African-American painters who found their own entrepreneurship in ways to just create and document the natural landscape of Florida and stuff like that. So when I heard about that story, I was like, you know, this is something that I want to research. And I was like, there has to be more stories like this. So that's what really intrigued me to kind of begin my research of these stories of Black individuals inside of like Florida's history as it kind of related to the outdoors.
Yeah, crazy, because I didn't know about it either. But yeah, there's so many like hidden histories that you just have to be a little bit of a go-getter to be able to uncover them. I'm curious to know what so you were there for a month, you stayed the entire month in residence on this site, right?
Yes, out in the Everglades full time. I feel like a lot of people are like, were you still in Miami driving every day? No, I was out there.
I have to say, you're quite smart for selecting January as your month. That's like perfect time to be out in the Everglades. Like
perfect time, great weather, very few mosquitoes. Highly recommend.
I'm curious to know what your day-to-day was like. Did you have an itinerary where you were like very specific about the things that you wanted to accomplish? Or were you a bit more of like a flaneur, which just someone that allowed the environment to kind of direct what they wanted to uncover?
Yeah, and like it's my work that's showing now, like you'll begin that I began with the vision of what I wanted to do. And then it was like, once I got there, I just realized I wasn't the one in control. I had to depend on the weather, the time of day, the lighting, and all these things. So it really just became this exploration of going through the landscape, waiting for the perfect lighting, waiting for the perfect time. And I think that really changed the pace that I was working at and my whole perspective of like what I envisioned myself doing. So I got to like, begin photographing this kind of otherworldly feeling space that was the Everglades in this specific context, inspired by, the lighting, the colors of the Florida Highwaymen and their paintings. So really taking the landscape and just like following it and listening to it is essentially how I felt like the work began to progress, because then I began to explore the feeling, the emotions through the photography, and then, inviting family and friends out and documenting this whole experience in this interesting way that really allowed me to, re-envision what the Everglades was and the ties to Black history, these Black origins and stories, and really claim space there as well, in addition to listening to the environment and the stories that belong there.
Did you get to speak to visitors at the park? Was there any interaction with humans to get insight into their understanding of what the Everglades were? Did you get to share your work with people while you were there?
Yes, so actually being there with the cabin is, you're surrounded by the other, rangers during the main visiting season, being that I was in the main visiting season, and being able to share with them, hear their stories, hear their take on the Everglades, people who have, volunteered in the park and been here for years, and rangers and staff. And I think even they were interested to seeing like my take with my photography work, but it was so interesting. And these conversations really began to lead to a better understanding of the Everglades, a better understanding of the stories that were there. And, just conversations led to me finding more and more stories by also asking questions to the rangers, asking questions to the staff in the research center. And now I have like a whole body of research that I'm still getting through. But, it's very beautiful to see all these stories and seeing that there was also so much Black history within the Everglades that I had never known beforehand.
And the Rangers knew this history, right? I'm sure that.
So there were some that knew it, and then others that kind of gave me tidbits. And then as I kind of followed those leads, one person connected me to another, and then like also learning about Black Seminoles and then more indigenous kind of groups that existed within the Everglades. And it just kind of just continued to snowball into more and more conversations and connections.
And did you document the conversations that you had with people? Was it documented visually, or did you audio record, or you take notes after the fact? I'm positive that there's just so much wealth in there. I'm wondering how you process all of that.
So a lot of sketchbook notes taken to go from one person to the next. But then, getting access, a lot of it is documented through photography. Like I photographed the spaces that they were talking about. I'd go back and visit some of these spaces and document it to see, what is the story that I'm listening to, but then also to feel the environment that it was in, and just imagining, some of the history and stuff there, like imagine what people went through when there wasn't a road that gets you from point A to point B, people trekking through the swamp, or like even doing the swamp walk, getting that experience of going to Sluice Log and walking through the actual Everglades, off terrain. And that experience really was like, wow, this is what people were doing. I couldn't imagine, full time or even at night going through it. That I could not.
Full-blown sensory experience of like sounds and like the sounds. I don't even want to know the sounds that you must have heard. You're very brave. Did you go into this experience like with a goal in mind, or was it something like afterwards? Did you come out with something completely different?
I think I went in with a goal, but very quickly realized that it was much more of an experience, and seeing that AIRIE also encouraged just experiencing different things. Because at first I was like, very research minded, like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. like within this time span. And then within the first couple of days that fell apart. That was not it. You know, I found myself on a boat trip in the backcountry of the Everglades, like seeing the 10,000 islands and different things. So it was like, then I realized, you know, my point is to really be in this moment and experiencing each and every moment and seeing as much of the park as I could. And I feel like I explored so much, and also pushed myself out of my comfort zone, you know, kayaking across alligators and crocodiles and all sorts of experiences that I just would never do normally. But, you know, being in this position and having, you know, a guide or certain things and having people kind of embrace it as well made me feel a lot more comfortable. I definitely was a lot more comfortable there than I initially thought I would be. And that just allowed me to say yes to everything, you know, even if I was like, I don't know, I wouldn't normally do that. I was like, you know what, just do it, experience it. You know, you're here for this reason. And I feel like even from that, you know, sharing these experiences and stuff, more people who I would have never thought are interested are like, hey, like, can you tell me this about the Everglades? How do I do that? And I'm like, wow, you know, there's a lot of people who just needed to see someone else doing that to feel comfortable enough to go and do it as well.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, you speak about your work as an opportunity to provide audiences an opportunity to look at things in different perspectives. And so I think that you most definitely succeeded in that. Like these I think it's really interesting that you said that you were guided by the light and by you know that directed kind of like when you would go to certain places and what you would see. And in a way, like a flaneur within a city, it's the hustle and bustle and the noise and the smells, but then taking it into this space of like nature and this like introspective moment is very interesting. And I also wanted to say in regards to like having a very planned itinerary and then realizing that like, wait, no, like this makes more sense. I think that universities and college, you know, like you feel like you have to be like on this very strict schedule to be able to get the most out of the experience, but really you saying that you just needed to be immersed in the environment, whatever that meant, is very liberating. And I think that is what residencies are for. You don't need to feel like you're, you know, doing something every 2 seconds.
Exactly. And I feel like that really helped me to also see within my work that like everything doesn't have to be so fixed and timed. And now I'm a little looser with how I work, because the amount of inspiration that I got just like, you know, existing and being in the space is much more than I think if I would have stayed directly inside books and like researching in that manner. But having these conversations with people and allowing it to just like develop organically really just shifted my perspective, and also my perspective of like how I want to continue working, you know, in the future in this way that's, you know, really going out and meeting different people and doing a more kind of research, almost like journalism. I felt like I was a journalist.
Well,
going
I mean,
after the story.
That's the thing. Photojournalism is
yeah. So I honestly felt that way, just going and, you know, and then also just learning how to work with lighting in the Everglades, how to work and what times worked. You know, sometimes I tried doing a sunrise, then I realized I'm not really a morning person, so let's try the sunset. So like these little lessons learned, or certain places I'd go to and I'd missed the shot, and then I'd be like, oh, we got to go again. So it really was just like a very process driven experience of like first adjusting there, learning the ways, and then realizing that I just had to like, you know, follow the nature itself to achieve certain images or certain things.
And it was all digital photography, correct?
Yes.
Did you do any like just camera, iPhone, both?
So the images that were shown were all on my actual DSLR camera, but I did take a lot of iPhone shots. I did shoot some film, but I haven't developed it yet. But we'll see. That's something for the future to see how those came out.
I can't wait to see that. And so after this experience, like, where do you see the knowledge that you gained? How are you going to apply that moving forward in your practice? Are there certain things that maybe you still have questions about and you'd like to revisit, or do you like, just curious to know like what this springboard provided for you?
Yeah, I'd say it has affected me in multiple ways. In one sense, like I was talking, my practice itself and how I want to continue working in different ways. Like I think now I'm a lot more curious in like conversations with people, really experiencing places and moments, and letting that drive the inspiration rather than trying to figure every detail out, research before, very full packed down, to just like experience it, enjoy that process of these conversations, because I met so many different people that I would have never thought to meet out in the Everglades or related to the Everglades. And that has just like, opened my eyes to seeing, how much you can just like learn from a conversation with a person, and that everything can move at that slower pace. And, and I feel like that pace you can feel it in the work, that it was much of a viewing, experiencing of the Everglades itself. And you kind of see that, like I'm saying, communicated through the work, communicated in the way that I was moving. Like I didn't even realize how, I guess, chill of a pace I was at until it ended and I came back to Miami, and I'm like, oh my, I can't do this. Like I wish I could just go walk on a trail or something, like, replying to emails and having to do this and that. Whereas like, there I really got to just immerse, leave my phone back, like not reply to emails all day, really having that time was just a really great moment that I'm like, now I have to find ways, within my routine, how do I find that kind of, peace and silence, within the day-to-day life. As
That's
well.
that's a great segue into another question that I had for you, which was how you take time for yourself as a human and as an artist. So I'm sure that there's tactics that you acquired while being isolated in the Everglades, but Zoom fatigue, just being stress on the body and on the mind is a real thing. And we kind of overextend ourselves, whatever industry we're in. So how do you kind of take the Cornelius Tulloch time?
Yeah. So I feel like it really like, it's funny to say, because I feel like sometimes for creatives, like when you're working, sometimes you just want to be away from your work. But in a way, I think I started a second Instagram page called toll.yard. And that has been something where it's like, there's no pressure. I'm just creating at a slower pace. So I'd go on walks or certain things, throughout the pandemic, and begin to learn to, to be creative, but not have it be forced. And I feel like this experience in the Everglades allowed me to see like, you can take that time out of your day for yourself, that it is okay for us to take those moments to go for a walk, to be outside, to take things at a slower pace. And I think that has also just like kept me sane, and I feel like we can all introduce things like that into our daily lives. But I also enjoy very normal things, cooking, being around my family, and that's was something that I was fortunate enough, being from Miami, that I had friends and family who were close enough to be able to drive out for the day, and like spending time with them there was also something that I'm going to hold with me forever. Because it's like, after being there, being able to introduce them to the experience that I was having within a residency, and allowing them to see the park and like, experiencing it, and, begin our own story, with it. Whereas like, formerly I hadn't been to the Everglades as often, going from, living my entire life only going to the Everglades once or twice to now being there every single day, 24 hours a day.
You're an expert now.
So, I feel like that has just been a really great thing now that, I value that time that I spent with family and friends there who were able to come out and just go on trails with me as well.
Yeah, I wish I would have had the chance to go and meet up with you there, because I have to say I'm guilty of not exploring our national parks the way that I probably should.
We all are.
Oh, I know. Which actually, this is a question that we might not have spoken about before, but just the way that the conversation has evolved. You are a Jamaican American, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Have you had opportunities to explore Jamaica the way that you explored the Everglades, like an experience where you were directly connected to like the natural fauna and fauna of a landscape and understanding. I know that you have a series which you created in Jamaica that was specifically tied to the fruits and natural fruits and vegetables. So I'm curious to know if maybe like this was an opportunity that has prompted you to think about opportunities in Jamaica, because I know that that kind of in between both spaces is something that is really prevalent in your work. So
yeah, and I feel like that's something that like even that intrigued me to do AIRIE as well, because like I felt like I have explored different parts of Jamaica naturally. Going out is just more common for me to be outdoors when I'm there with family and stuff and experiencing. We go hiking, we go to rivers, we do all these different things. But in the US, I never really did that. You know, my family never really explored these natural spaces in the same way. So, you know, seeing that this was an opportunity to, you know, explore the landscape of Florida more. And I think within that, I've began to use some of the ways that I'm thinking, like you're saying, like I was looking at natural landscapes, fruits, vegetables, how do these things serve as like cultural icons or tell a story of a space, and seeing that, you know, that also exists here within the US in these different ways. So tying to my African-American side and seeing like, I can begin to explore the dialogue of, you know, that cultural history as it relates to the landscape, cultivating the landscape, being within natural spaces in a similar lens. And I think that is another shift that within my work, you know, really now I'm curious to know, you know, talk about these two different spaces, how they are in conversation with each other, but also different, because even in my time at AIRIE, I found the story of the Saltwater Railroad, which I had never heard before, which essentially is a version of the Underground Railroad that went through Florida, but actually to the Bahamas. And seeing that, you know, slaves would go to return in that same direction of that route was something to see. You know, there's all this cultural exchange that came from those things and came from the way that people move through the environment and the landscape. And there's so much history between all these different countries and spaces that, you know, sometimes goes overlooked or underrepresented. And I feel like as an artist, it was a great opportunity to begin to explore some of these narratives and to also be able to continue afterwards. Because I feel like a part of AIRIE is that, you know, the research doesn't stop once your time in the residency ends. It's like, I feel like I have more conversations and questions now than I did.
and I think that that's a great place to be. I mean, I think that your work is very layered, and this experience will be able to transcend beyond just, you know, photographic work, but somehow design wise, I don't, you know, within the architecture realm, fashion realm, which you are very much a part of, seeing how it manifests itself. And it might not necessarily happen this year, but this experience, I feel like, you know, has impacted you in a way that you are that it will weave itself into things that you explore
Definitely,
moving
definitely.
forward. I think so. I hope so.
Definitely will.
So as a young artist, and I want to say you're 22. I can't remember. You're 22.
24.
Damn it. Still very young. I would love to know what advice, like maybe like top 3 advice points for the younger generation of artists that might consider themselves interdisciplinary and are not sure, you know, when they're applying to college, what they should declare themselves as, or if they're applying to a residency that is specific to, you know, to categorize themselves. Like, how do you kind of like get past that and show this full Renaissance person?
No, definitely. I feel like you can't categorize yourself. You have to embrace it. And I feel like that was a learning process for me as well, or more of a, I guess, a resistance, you know, or certain spaces or times, especially going through schooling and stuff, when you can only really focus your mind on so many things. when I'd be in architecture studios, I'm like, I need to do a different studio. Let me get a whole fashion studio and learn this skill set and thing. And I think there's just something beautiful about, learning to work in these different ways and, expanding your skill set, expanding the ways that you want to work and collaborate. And I think also collaboration is a great way to experience and dabble into different mediums, working with people. And I feel like for any young artist to just continue, like, especially if you want to do the interdisciplinary route, with the route, there's no direct course or like goal set as in some industries where you might be like, oh, I need to do this, that to get to the next point. But I think there's a beauty in like embracing this journey. And that's the same thing like being an AIRIE, like, it's a journey and you have to just embrace those random moments, and different projects and things will just lead you to what's right for you, and figuring out, what stories do you want to tell? What things do you want to focus on? How do you build community within these spaces? And how do you interact in different ways? And I feel like as long as you stay true to, what that focus is, that everything will come along in different types of projects. Because now I'm doing all types of projects. I'm working on architecture projects, I'm working on art things, I'm working on different things. And people are now beginning to understand that, it's not about the medium, but like, what ideas does this artist or person bring to the table? And I think that way we can begin to create really beautiful things and tell really interesting stories.
I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like there needs to be, you are the paradigm shift where we no longer think about things in genres, we think about the stories that are being told. And I'm sure this is not new, but I feel like at a very young age, you kind of were already doing that. So I just think that that's so special. I had one last question before we start getting into the audience questions. I know that you have an upcoming exhibition in the works.
Yeah.
Opening at the start of March. I don't know what little sneak previews you can give us about that exhibition.
Yeah, so I'll be doing a photographic exhibition on a project that I actually worked on throughout the pandemic, where I was documenting different Caribbean American families, Black families within Miami throughout the pandemic. And it actually started with my own family. It has been like friends and different people now. But this exhibition is going to be on March 5th at Laundromat Art Space. And I'm going to pull up the exact address and everything. But I think it's going to be a really great opportunity for everyone to come and see my work within Miami. But, the exhibition is also going to be partial installation. So in this way, I'll be showing, what do I mean when I say I'm an interdisciplinary artist, showing photography, but in a way that allows you to reinterpret it into space and objects and different things, and really taking this idea of the Black home and turning the gallery space into that. So it's going to be exciting. Definitely everyone save March 5th at Laundromat Art Space from 6 to 9 p.m.
Oh, we will all be there. We will all be there. And when you make this installation, are you bringing things from your home?
Yes. So some things from my home, some things thrifted, other things borrowed. And I feel like that shows the communalness of what this process has been, even with documenting and people allowing me to come into their homes, family members trusting me to photograph them and, put that out there. So I feel with that comes like a responsibility to also deliver and make sure that everything is being done in the right light as well.
Yeah, and your architectural skills are going to come to good use with this.
Yes.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure to speak with you and get some more insight into just everything Cornelius. Jane, I think that you had mentioned we have some questions.
Yeah, there are some questions, and you were just talking about all of Cornelius's multidisciplinary talents. And so one question was, has anything about the Everglades inspired you design-wise, Cornelius?
I think about the Everglades design-wise, I think so many things, seeing the way that the landscape, something that I loved about the Everglades is like how they talk about it on some of the tours in ways that like you don't think about in a design sense where they're like, certain animals are engineers of the Everglades, like alligators come and they push the landscape and they create water pockets and spaces within it. Also how water, as you go through the park, literally controls, the landscape and the things that are there. So I think as a designer, you're inspired to see like systems within everyday life, how these things contribute. And it's actually funny because one of my first architecture school projects I did was inspired by mangroves and how water takes the salinity, the salt out of water and stuff. And I designed a drawing machine that created drawings based off of the mangroves. And I feel like this was also a full circle moment to actually experience the Everglades and see these things in person for that amount of time. But yeah, definitely tons of inspiration.
Wow. I do, like I've mentioned, I've talked to artists who've been in the Everglades 10 years ago, and they're saying that they're still processing. So this conversation is definitely one that's going to need to continue. But another question that just came through, and then there's like a bigger topic that lots of people are asking about, is what was the biggest takeaway from your experience in the Everglades so far, Cornelius?
I think the biggest takeaway for me was that sometimes going into something that might be uncomfortable could be one of the best things for you. And I felt like this was like, I didn't know what to expect with accepting AIRIE, going out into the Everglades. Being from Miami people are like, the Everglades? Well, I guess it depends on where in Miami, but some of us are like, really? Because I feel like when I tell people, oh, I'm gonna be in the Everglades for a month, they're like, what? But like, this was one of the best experiences of my life. And like, just being able to be out there and be so like open to trying different things. I think that for me has allowed me to just be so much more open to trying and putting myself in different spaces and really just like exploring, because even though originally I didn't know all these different stories and histories relating to Black history were there, I found so much by, really just embracing the experience and delving into that research.
So there are questions about Saltwater Underground Railroad and Black Seminoles and the Florida Highwaymen. But first, Audrey Peterman is in the audience, and she has been a collaborator with AIRIE in the past, and she had a conversation in the previous exhibition that we did, that a lot of that research is what you were reading in the AIRIE library. And she says, a friend said after her first visit to the Inhinga Trail, I thought the Everglades was snakes and swamps, and now I find it is beauty and culture. What did your relatives and friends say about their first visit?
Yeah, that's great. I feel like my friends and relatives really embraced it in ways that I didn't think. And being able to see how open they were to going on the trails, experiencing different things. Like now my mom wants to go on a sluice log, so I have to find time to schedule to go back. Never would have thought that would have happened. But, these things where it's like, people are genuinely intrigued by the landscape. And my friends, even sometimes one of my friends was even more adventurous than I was. They were like, let's go to the deepest, darkest trail and like explore it. And I'm like, you sure? So just seeing the difference in reactions, and like now seeing that they also see it as a space that like, as a family, as friends, we can go to the Everglades and hang out, is something that like, I'm like, wow, like this is something that we can begin doing. And really, my purpose from there was like to build this relationship with the landscape, with the Everglades. And I feel like now it's establishing, and hopefully, everyone will eventually feel like they belong in the Everglades and they have a tie historically to it as well.
So, oh, I just lost all my windows. Okay. So then Audrey continues to say, wow, so happy to hear you mention the Saltwater Underground Railroad created by our Bohemian friend, Stefan Moss. Well, some info there. And so another question is, two questions, actually. Could Cornelius explain more about the Saltwater Railroad and what you've learned? Again, it's a long time for processing, but have you, and then also the second question is, has conservation issues in the Everglades related to the current climate crisis affected your practice here in connection with your residency as well? So was climate crisis something you're considering?
So I'll begin with the Saltwater Railroad. I'm still even uncovering it. And that's something that I said, like there's these different pockets of information and stories, but there's no exact one source for it. And I feel like that process was like this exploration of like trying to connect dots, and then finding out like that the poster that was in there was about the Saltwater Railroad the entire time that I was there, and only finding that out like 2 weeks in, that that's what I was literally looking at, sleeping by. But the Saltwater Railroad essentially is that route that I said that goes to Bahamas. Some say also Cuba, but mostly to the Bahamas, where slaves would come through Florida, mostly along the western coast, down, and then coming through through Florida, Miami. And I believe it was also mentioned to me that at the Biscayne National Park, there's a lighthouse that also acknowledges it there, and the beaches there. And I feel like you can only imagine what that journey must have been like to go through literally all of Florida. We know all that's out there. I saw all that was out there. So I could not imagine, that journey and like that courage that it took to go there. But I think there's so much power in that story and history, and seeing, essentially a return, and seeing this ways that, we always have looked at kind of slave trade and transatlantic slave trade as something that, continuing, going forward, but never this idea of going back, and seeing how that must be also have shifted culture in different ways that people never think about, or shifted perspectives of what was happening in the Caribbean during those times. So I think it's a much longer story that I myself am figuring out. But no, it's definitely something that has intrigued me and will, I feel, affect my work in so many different ways. Yeah. And I would say me particular, I was more focused on the cultures and histories rather than essentially conservation, but I feel like conservation comes with it, acknowledging this landscape, acknowledging the stories that were there, seeing different ways, going with the hydrologist and checking certain things, and seeing that literally in the park, there's always things happening. There's always scientific things, there's always someone helping to, deal with the climate crisis, dealing with the salinity in the water, dealing with these different things that we don't think about, but there's someone working to preserve these natural environments, to preserve these coasts for us. The Everglades and all those marshes and things serve as like helping us against storms and different things. So learning about all these things that I didn't necessarily know or even know what's going on there, to help us in our city of Miami, and different things that, I feel like it affects each and every one of us. So in a way, it may not have been the focus of my work, but, it has influenced my perspective, I'll say.
That is so interesting, that it's hard to be in that environment without realizing how like precarious it is, because you're witnessing all of these people working to preserve it.
Yes.
So the next question is about Black Seminoles. Are there currently Black Seminoles living on Everglades land reservations that you were able to meet or talk to?
So I didn't particularly talk to one that was living in the Everglades, but I did get in contact with a Black Seminole, someone who's from the Florida Seminole tribe. And we just had a conversation that has led into more conversations. And now we're actually looking at the potential of collaborating and working and, like acknowledging that history and story. And like, as soon as that ends, like he just randomly, like I got connected to him, and then he emailed, and within 30 minutes we were on the phone, because he was like, to see another Black person out in the Everglades and knowing the space and territories, like I just would never have expected, besides coming from, my history and stuff. So he's like, when I saw you and I saw your email, like I just knew I had to support this. And I feel like that level of support is something that we need. And I learned so much about, within maybe an hour phone call, just about, the complexity that comes with being, Florida Black Seminoles, and the idea that even within being a Black Seminole, there's so many differences, whether, they're solely coming from the indigenous people, and then so happen that they have kind of began to mix histories and stories, versus people who were freed slaves who joined the Seminoles as a separate, but still living kind of as a separate community within it, and naming the freedmen Black Seminoles. So there's like so much to learn, and so much that I'm still also, unpacking within that story and complexity. But I think it's just really great to hear about it from someone who's directly affected or, a part of this community, because they have a certain, intimacy with the topic itself. And within like such a short conversation, there were so many things or preconceived notions that I was like, oh, maybe this is what a Black Seminole is through a book that he broke down in seconds and was like, even though there is writing and stuff about it, like some of these things aren't exactly accurate. So to hear those storylines and things personally was just really amazing.
Oh, that's an amazing, amazing takeaway. Is there anything else? Oh, here's one. Did you get a chance to interview any of the surviving Florida Highwaymen? If not, is that something you're interested in? And how do they influence your work?
Okay, yeah. I haven't gotten to interview any, but I think it's interesting as I'm thinking back from like applying to AIRIE about the Florida Highwaymen. And then I did another residency last fall where I ended up in New Smyrna Beach, Florida, and there has a lot of history of the Florida Highwaymen. So being there, I got to explore into some of the storylines and more about them. And that just was like by chance that I ended up doing that and finding out that New Smyrna was like a hot spot for the Florida Highwaymen and their painting. So getting to be able to see it. And then finding out that one of my friends' families had a collection of paintings and like being able to visit their home and like see all the paintings in person in their own private collection, to another point where I ordered a used book about the Florida Highwaymen on the internet. And when I got it, it came with their signatures, handwritten notes of them talking to whoever the person who owned the book. So it was like all these things aligning that I was like, it's honestly crazy that it has like grown from that, from like me just applying to AIRIE, last year, not even thinking much about it or not knowing much, to all these little points that just kept coming up to the moment of actually going to the Everglades and having this experience where it was like, almost meant to be in a way, all these different things and having that level of insight, and even reading their little notes and things that they talked about their lives, where even in the book, one of them wrote like, this is not true about me. This is like all fake, like make sure they fix it, this, that. And so like all these little things where it was like, you could see their personalities within it. And, I hope to one day, meet and actually interview some of the surviving ones or their children to really get even more insight. But, speaking to that, and even my friend's family who had that collection of them, they had spoken to them and they told me about like meeting them and different things. So it was just by chance that all that kind of like, fell in my lap and was able to get as much insight as I did get about them.
Wow. Story is, it relates to the sort of unwinding experiential aspect of like this work and how it's going to maybe impact your practice of like, letting things reveal themselves. That's really exciting. Let's see, continuing on Florida Highwaymen, maybe explaining a little bit more about how they've affected your practice, but also your photos have red and other lighting in them in the foreground. Is this part of the Highwaymen influence? You can sort of talk about those in one go.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like color has always been a part of my work, a part of my photography, and as I'm kind of investigating space. And it was interesting because even within figuring out, what colors am I going to use to mark the Everglades, like my initial thought was like red tones, because I always work in like warmer tones that just remind me of like sunset, but also this idea of warmth but caution at the same time, which is like I feel like how I felt entering the Everglades. And then, discussing, does this feel inviting? And like, and I feel like even with that process, like friends, me talking about my work to my friends as they saw me documenting this, where they're like, there's a little too much caution, like maybe within it, explore the lighting in a way, that allows you to reimagine the space and really look into it in a different perspective. And then that's when I began to explore with cooler tones and other things. I took so many photos, still so many to edit. That's one thing about being there for so long. You have so much time to just shoot. But seeing that, I wanted to relook at this environment in this kind of way where I talk about lighting being a character, so seeing that when the light shines in that photograph, that also is marking, a sense of like my presence, a presence of these histories and stories. So although they don't all like, include a person or different things, I feel like you can feel this presence, this storyline as you kind of meander through the images themselves. And I'm still, unpacking what each thing is, because I did go also to some very specific locations that had ties to these different stories and things, where I was like shooting in Flamingo part of the Everglades, because that's where people exited the Everglades, but also immigrants came to the US from Bahamas and Jamaica to the Everglades from that point. So, getting certain initial spaces really just allow me to explore that and this mood and emotions through the lighting.
I love the photos. I love them so much. So I can't wait to see when we've got some. I can't wait to see them up in an exhibition, if that's gonna happen.
Yes.
That's gotta happen.
Someday.
I
Let's see.
Ideas are
I'm about to. Cornelius, do you have information about your exhibition, or should I just put the Laundromat Art Space link up?
I do have information. Let me pull that up.
All right, let me find the last couple questions we'll do. And if anyone else has questions they want to add to the chat, I've got a couple more. One of them, this is fun. Did you have a chance to eat any exotic foods or try something you never ate before?
I wouldn't say any specific exotic foods. I think Robert is here, has like a lot of really interesting fruits that I really didn't try much. I guess I had different things in my smoothies, but not anything specific. But I was very surprised by, just outside of the Everglades, how many different types of foods and restaurants there were. Like there's really amazing Mexican food, really amazing like seafood, Jamaican food, and all these things that, although it wasn't directly in the park, just to know that it was that close, I felt like I did not know that this was a hot spot for such great food right outside of the Everglades. But I can't necessarily say I ate anything very specific that was like super exotic or out there.
You didn't get like one of the cacao seeds or the emu eggs from Robert?
No. My exploration stopped at the culinary palettes.
Let's see. As an artist and creative yourself, how do you believe your experience was unique in regards to your approach and execution of your experience? Is there any particular is there any particular experience you would revisit and approach with a different mindset? So like,
yeah, everything definitely has changed the way that I see things, especially when it comes to the Everglades, like knowing that there's so much there's so many different plants and spaces and like terrain that I just had never imagined. But I think when it comes to my practice specifically, the way that I shoot photography has changed. Like I had to like lessen like where I'm used to using a whole like photo set type of experience with, even though like having photography that way, I would bring lights and a full thing, whereas now I had to shift to like just my camera, a small light, or different ways to manipulate lighting. So that's why I was saying how like the timing of day and thing became such a large factor, because I had less control, of the environment, and being able to embrace that lessness of control, I guess if that's a word, less having less control really has changed the way that I do photography, and seeing what can be possible throughout it. And I think I'll definitely revisit, the Everglades as like this setup to do more photography and possibly include people in the work itself. And hopefully that with some of these leads that I have, talking to different people, talking to that guy that's a member of Black Seminole, different things, that I can go and like, honor these people and these histories in a way that may be more of like photo documenting and like photojournalism that really allows me to re-envision the landscape, but also, directly include these people into that idea of a more just, I guess, like social practice as an artist, in working in that way.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the stories. I can imagine the stories you're going to tell. I love the connections that you made in order to be able to tell these stories. There is, Cornelius just stuck all the information in the chat about his upcoming exhibition. And there was a question about, do people need to RSVP?
As of now, no. So
But
hopefully
just do it because
yeah.
I didn't do that once, and then
yeah, that.
Is there
So
RSVP?
as of now, there's no link, but we're considering it depending on like how many people we think are coming. But if anything, I'll let you know. Also, go to my Instagram. You'll find all the information there. There's always information and new things.
Yeah, we'll
on my
have
Instagram. So
we'll have Cornelius's Instagram up on the screen. He might stick it in the chat in just a second. Luisa, do you have anything that you want to follow up with, or Cornelius, anything else that you want to say about your experience? And
I mean, I will just Cornelius, you can end it, but I want to say what an absolute pleasure it was to be invited to be part of this conversation and to just really speak casually with you, Cornelius, and get so much more insight into what it is that you're doing right now. And there were so many things that you brought up that sparked so many ideas in my head as to like, how does this connect to his architecture practice and how can he bring that in? So like, ready for that studio visit. And
yes.
Jane, thank you so much.
thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add like that, like I'm just grateful to AIRIE, for Jane, everyone who has just made it such a welcoming experience for me, and hopefully that other artists can have that amazing time to really be open to the process and through it. And something else that I mentioned, and even just like Jane being here, Luisa being here, showing the idea of community, that we've known each other for 6 years, all of us through arts organizations and things, and like the fact that artists need this level of support. They need this level of support from the beginning, not once they start making or doing things, but to see the way that art organizations within Miami have been supporting artists throughout these different stages. Even finding out that some of the board members were a part of MOCA, and I did MOCA when I was in middle school. So it's like this journey began way before, I could even imagine or knew what route I was going on, where I was doing, portfolio development at MOCA as a middle school student, getting into art and stuff, and then being supported by organizations like YoungArts within that stage, into now doing residency. So having that level aside, also so grateful just to like those people who are on the admin side of like arts organizations.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks. I'm going to now thank you. I'm going to thank you, Cornelius and Luisa, for sharing your time with us. I had my colleague Heather behind the scenes, who's been putting things up on the screen and helping me out. And I'd love to thank everyone who has also given us their time tonight.